Okay, you guys, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. This is not your typical card game night, so got you all here to play Rummy Cube, but this has been something that I've been trying to work with Richard, and finally we found a good time to do it. I've known Richard since high school. We both lived in Louisiana. We were there and had a big good group of friends that we hung out with and had a really good time. We had a really good, strong group of friends. Since then, we both went to BYU, and he graduated in the College of Engineering, and he worked in management, business management, and he worked for a legislative research company and got a really good background in the way that lobbying Congress works and all those fun things. And he and his partners at FreedomSHIFT are trying to bring that concept to the average American so that we can actually have a meaningful and effective voice in our government. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say. I hope you're all motivated, and I hope we can start spreading the word and trying to encourage others to get involved. So I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you. That was a great introduction. I almost got emotional actually remembering our friend group back in Louisiana. We did have some good times there. And that was a great introduction. My time in corporate America was not with the legislative research group. I was a project manager and was in management and so forth. And then somehow, and Dina can attest to this, my wife Dina here is with us, and she was in my office one night late and didn't intend to talk about this, so I got to be quick. She's here to keep me on track too. So
I want to hear this.
But I was in my office late one night. I was the director of facility management at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. I worked for a big outsourcing corporation that signed that contract. And so there I was, and I was really concerned about what I was seeing in America. I had no idea what to do about it. I just had this general feeling of, this isn't right. Something's wrong. There's a bigger agenda that I have no way to put my finger on. And I remember listening to this news piece, driving home from work one day. I took a break from sports radio that day, and I was listening to NPR, okay, so that was to help me be more diverse in my news consumption. And I'm listening to this human interest story, and I started scratching my head going, is this really happening in America? And we're actually promoting it as if this is a good thing on national public radio that's federally funded. And I'm going, something's not right here. But I had no clue. I mean, I got my, as you just heard, I got my high school diploma in Louisiana, which fought with Mississippi for last place in the nation on education, I think. Is that fair to say? And so my civics was pretty lacking there. I just didn't know how to understand it, comprehend it, put my finger on it. And that started this process. I found out about this legislative research firm. And one day I came home and I said, Dina, I think I'm supposed to go this route. Here I was being promoted in corporate America, everything was going well. And she looked at me, she was like, what are you talking about? And I think the words out of her mouth were, that sounds kind of hokey. Let's not do that, right? And anyway, that was 17, 18 years ago. And so I've had a lot of experience since then, being a state delegate and influencing government, being involved with a legislative research firm. I've literally sat face to face with over 10,000 people conducting legislative research, asking them questions about their concerns, thoughts on government, and so forth. So I've looked eyeball to eyeball with the backbone of America and seen the frustration, the concern, and also the ignorance out there. So what this presentation is really meant to be a bit of a conversation. I'll kind of save questions to the end. If there's something you really want to ask, go right ahead. But I want to talk about our land of liberty, the fact that it really is under siege, and that there is something we can do about it. This is a hopeful message today. And so I'm an optimist, but also a realist. I got my degree in college engineering. I like spreadsheets. So I do like data. I like to analyze things. And I'm also a coach. I coach high school sports. Right now we're in the basketball season. I'm a head coach for a high school varsity basketball. And as a coach, I also coach business professionals. It's something else I do. And in that coaching process, it's important to understand your opposition, your competition, right? And so you need to clearly see that But in this case, the opposition is a little bit bigger than just government as well. It's human nature, it's understanding history, it's education system. There's a lot of little components, and we don't have time to get into all of it today. So I'm going to try to really keep things concise here. The most important thing to pay attention to is there is a system of government that protects our inherent rights. And that system is still intact. And we the people still have results when we decide to get organized and involved and influence in a way that's effective instead of a way that gets us canceled or arrested in certain cases recently, which is very alarming, right? Calling parents domestic terrorists for having the audacity to complain to a school board, who is their elected officials. So, let's go ahead and dive into this. And this idea, what is a freedom shift? It is the name of our organization, but it also is this concept that societies tend to shift cyclically from more freedom to more force, and from force to freedom, and back and forth. Scholar Oliver DeMille said this happens roughly every 100 years. And we're in a position to have another big shift. And the question is, will it be towards freedom or will it be towards more force? Because it's been in a force shift for quite a while now, but I see that the provocation is real. People are starting to wake up. They're concerned. And so that's really the question we're here to answer. So in the next hour, roughly, we will talk about how can we recognize the threats to our liberty, why the US Constitution is still relevant, why it matters, why it's important to protect, proof that we the people still do have an influence, and how do you get results? How do you be effective without this becoming your full-time job or hobby, or, because how many of us really have time to take politics on as something you like? Is anybody really excited about it? Maybe some of you are a little bit weird like me in here, but we really don't. So as a coach, I was going to bring no pain, no gain into this somehow, right? Well, I believe that it's more than that. It's not no pain when it comes to freedom. It's no pain, no freedom. And what do I mean by that? Some understand that a lot better. I was just talking with you about coming from Lithuania and seeing those different perspectives in nations that were under the Iron Curtain. But it's that pain that really sparks the human spirit, right? And it stokes those fires to get people to wake up and look around and say something needs to be done. And so you have to have that to some degree in order to change things, to make things better, to thrive. And I think there's a great story to illustrate this, kind of be a foundation of our conversation. Does anybody know who this person is on the screen here? Anybody recognize it? He actually was Polish. No. This is a Polish guy up here. And his name was Chaim Solomon. He's a Jew. And he lived in the 1700s. And his story is phenomenal when it comes to the birth of America. And most of us have never heard about it before. Chaim Solomon was pushed all over Europe, from Poland to Germany and different countries, trying to find a place where he could establish his family under freedom. He was a very successful businessman, financial broker, but he was pushed around, ultimately learned 8 languages, made kinds of connections with the leading business people and financial institutions in Europe as a part of this. But because of the oppression towards Jews, culturally as well as from a government perspective, mob rule and so forth pushed him out again and again. Finally, he looked to America in 1770 roughly and said, perhaps my family can have a better life there. Looks like there's an opportunity there. So he came to America right when the American Revolution is about to kick off. And there are things stirring. Remember, that pain in America was they were ready to kick things off because of the tyranny they were starting to see in Great Britain, and said, wait a minute, we've been having some self-rule for a while. We like that. But now Britain's coming back in and saying we're getting too strong, and they were concerned. And that started, that's a short history of the American Revolution right there. So he's an immigrant to America. He's Jewish, and he comes for the opportunity that America had, and was successful in business finance. The pain focused his purpose, because once he was here, he started to have success, but he didn't coast. He joined the American Revolutionary cause. Eventually he was captured by the British twice, second time sentenced to death. But because he spoke 8 languages, one of them being German, he was able to convince, persuade, and maybe bribe a little bit his Hessian guards, German mercenaries that were hired by the British, to help him escape. And not only escape, but he brought many of them with him, and they defected from that British conscription there, if you will. Or and so here he is escaping. He goes back to Philadelphia. His business is thriving again, and he won't rest. He throws himself fully into the American Revolutionary cause. There's a guy named Robert Morris, and you know his name from the American Revolution. He's known as the great financier of the American Revolution, involved in the government and helping keep Washington's troops running. I'll say that. He was bringing money. He had to bring money because our form of government at the time was awful. They had no way of collecting money. So it was business deal, transaction, loans after loan to keep Washington fighting another day. But the rest of the story is that without this man, Robert Morris wouldn't have been able to do much of what he did. At one point, the government is about to shut down completely. There's the creditors are calling upon America's debts. And Robert Morris is completely distraught. He's like, we're so close. And we're going to lose this battle because we don't have money to fight another day. And on the day when the loans were due, a figure darkens Mr. Morris's room. And it's not the bill collectors, it's Haim Solomon. And he offers payment in full for those debts. And it was impossible. Robert Morris is looking at him and says, this is impossible. The only way we could come up with this funds was from lending houses in Europe. And we could not get business transacted across the ocean in time to save us. And Haim said, nonetheless, he did it. The short story is he's probably the only person in America that could do it because of the reputation and character that he forged in the crucible of his opposition in Europe. His name was so well respected among those financial houses there that those that transacted business for them in America knew that his name would be enough justification for the loan they offered from Europe. That's Haim Solomon. He died broke. He died in 1785, didn't get to see the Constitution ratified or completed. The doctors told him to stop pushing so hard with this American government. You know, it's killing you. But he gave his life, he gave his fortune for the cause of freedom. Now think about it. How many Jewish lives did he save? How many immigrants have come to America, escaping regimes and governments and institutions and social settings that oppressed, even more murdered millions of Jews or other refugees from all over the world? He helped establish a place where refugees could come for freedom. In the end, he brokered over 75 financial deals, never took a commission for any of them, sacrificed for this cause of freedom. So that's Haim Solomon. So I look at stories like that and say, it helps me when I get discouraged by the provocation of what's happening out there. It helps me look at things and say, you know what? I can't give up. Men like Haim didn't give up. And I mean, we could look at so many others. I mean, that's one powerful story that probably none of you have heard before, right? How many other people were there like that have made it happen throughout all history and through the last 230 years of American history? People stand up and protect our freedoms. That's why we still have them today. And so I want to talk about just a few of these trends, and I'm going to go through these really quickly because now I'm probably behind time here. First of all, social media. Social media can be great. And as we know, it can also be a great stumbling block. And the problem is, how many of you have seen the film Social Dilemma? Highly encourage it. I'll show you a picture, image in a second. It really just shows you, here are the people that created Facebook and the programmers and everything. And they said, we've created a monster. And the monster is designed to commoditize you and me. And the more they can get us to stare at that screen, the more money they can make. And therefore it's designed to get us through our addictive behaviors and everything else to look at it longer and longer and longer. And therefore then you can send messages in that can continue to manipulate. And so it's a tool, but it's also something that can be a vice, and it can be a tool in the hands of people who would like to change our system of government. Political correctness. How many have ever felt a little bit discouraged by the call out culture, the cancel culture, and everything that's going on out there, right? Okay, enough said there. It is a tool of Marxism because you have to have a divided class warfare in order to stir up the masses enough to get the change needed in government. That's needed. So it's by design. And then there's this idea of weaponized education. Does anybody know what I mean by weaponized education? Is that a term you're familiar with? Or maybe you can kind of think about it for a minute. I'll explain it more in a minute. I was going to talk some more here, but let's move on. We'll talk about it in a second. So again, beware that you're a commodity to be sold at the highest price out there. And if you watch this film here, what's powerful about it is that you are talking to the very creators of you know, the programmers and the CEOs and their founders at different times of Pinterest and Facebook and all this stuff. And they're giving you a real perspective of what it's actually designed to do. And there's a real moral question right now of should we regulate this in a positive or in a way because of the psychological impact it can have on youth and others. So I encourage you to watch it so we don't take time to do that. Well, let's look at this idea of political correctness. Critical race theory. How many are familiar with critical race theory? Okay. Critical race theory, if we were to break it down in a nutshell, it's designed to put you in two different classes, the oppressed and the oppressors. I'm smelling our dog there. So you're either in an oppressor class or you're in an oppressed class. And what's the problem with trying to put everybody in two boxes?
They don't fit in boxes.
They don't fit in boxes, exactly. Every one of us has a unique background, cultural identity, fingerprints, iris, you name it. Every one of us are different. And people in differing races and the same races all have different experiences. And so it's dangerous to put us all in one box. And again, but it's a tool of Marxism to create division. Now you look at this name calling and labeling. Racist. It's like we can shut down discussion really quickly, like just throwing one of those insults at you. How many even know what cis hetero patriarchal is? I mean, know what that is. Well, I won't get into it now. I'll walk you through it later. But if you go listen to college campuses of America, if they don't like something that's being said, you'll hear them be able to string together a bunch of words like this so fast it'll blow your mind. And shut down any conversation by labeling you any number of those things there. Basically, that cis hetero patriarchal is me. Yeah, identifying with my own gender and so forth. So call out culture microaggressions. Students are feeling very empowered nowadays to say that makes me uncomfortable. And so we're not going to talk about the Holocaust because it's just too painful. That's too hard of a topic to take on. And they're being allowed to cancel anybody that comes on their campus that they don't agree with by saying it's triggering. Great book on that called The Coddling of American Mind. And what's powerful about it's written by two Democrats who said they've never voted for a Republican in their life, and yet they're saying we need more Republicans on college campuses. And I think Republican Democrat is something that also divides and distracts us as well. But we'll get into that maybe a little later too. So then these political agendas are being pushed into curriculum that are preparing youth to just accept or become tools of advancing a social agenda that allows us to undermine our freedoms. Does anybody know who Dean Mary Spellman is and know what her story is all about? She's the dean of Claremont McKenna College in California, or was, until she made the mistake of not being careful enough with her correspondence. A Latina student in their college wrote her a letter and said the following. I'm going to read this here. It says, our campus climate and institutional culture are primarily grounded in Western white cis heteronormative upper to middle class values. And then basically said, those of us that don't fall into that category are feeling marginalized and we don't fit your mold. She even used the word mold. And so here's Dean Spellman's response to her in private correspondence back and forth. Thank you for writing and sharing this article with me. We have a lot to do as a college community. Would you be willing to talk with me sometime about these issues? They're important to me, and we are working on how we can better serve students, especially those who don't fit our CMC mold. I would love to talk with you more. Now, you could say as a wordsmith that it's potentially offensive to say we don't fit our CMC mold. But because she was also using the words from this student's actual communication, then it makes you think, still in this crazy politically sensitive world, she might have been more careful with that. But this was not kept to a private conversation. She never came in. 2 weeks later, the student decided to put it out on social media and call her out. What ensued then was she was labeled, she was openly shamed, she was humiliated. She came to the students, brought in a forum, wanted to talk to them, wanted to have an open discussion about it, And instead, if you look at that image behind again, it became a rally, a witch hunt. And she at one point is crying as she's trying to reconcile all this with these students. Years, invested in this, in the students in a campus like this. As she's crying, one of the students calls her out, yells at her, "How dare you fall asleep while we're addressing you?" And mistakes that. And there's no public support from the college community, from the administration, nothing. She's left to hang out there. Ultimately, her only recourse is to resign. Now, this reminds me of what we're seeing here of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Another little great book, as you read it, it's called The Red Scarf Girl. Highly recommend that. It'll give you these, as you read through it, you'll be like, oh my goodness, this sounds like America today. Only different characters and different circumstances. And it's alarming. And here's what we see. The class division was landlords, property owners in the Cultural Revolution. Today, it's labels like racism, but the capitalist is also becoming a dirty word, or property owner, greedy business owners, you name it. And then we have the Red Guard. This was student in power to do exactly what happened to Dean Spellman there. And this call out culture is really a judgment by them all. And that's what's happening here. There's this shaming that's taking place. Has anybody been called out for your privileged status, or seen somebody apologize for their privileged status? A young Korean girl, her father's Korean, her mother's white, sweetest girl, and she has become angry, bitter, vitriolic, posting stuff you would believe on social media, and apologizing for her privileged status because of the white side of her. And she lives in a townhome. It's not like they have any opulence around them, and just amazing though how this culture has shifted into our kids to make them feel like I should be ashamed for something I can't even control. Weaponized education, critical race theories, sexualized education, the state, not the parent. We'll get into that in just a second. This virtue signaling, woke, jumping on the bandwagon really quickly. How did issues like Black Lives Matter become so controversial? I mean, why is that such a big deal to people? Why does it divide so much, for example? And why is it so trendy to put BLM on there without looking at the background of the organization? And how can we approach real issues with racism in a constructive way instead of a destructive way, right? It's interesting, but we'll jump on a bandwagon without considering the implications of where it might take us. Why? Because on the surface, it sounds like a good thing. And who doesn't, when you're a young college student, want to be a social justice warrior, right? I mean, we get passionate about it. There's a reason we're here tonight to talk about this, because we want to be involved in causes that make a difference. But these things are dividing and distracting us and keeping us from paying attention to the real thing, which is how do we protect the inalienable rights of every person around? How do we protect those rights? And then we get into this issue of class-based justice versus social justice and blind justice. And this is a concern. Social justice versus blind justice. Is there a difference? Why does that matter? I'll explain that in just a second. So let's go back to this idea of the Constitution in context. Why does the Constitution matter? Because the Constitution helps protect against the tyranny of the mob, or against an elite ruling class that want to top-down manage everything. It's put strict controls in place that happened through learned experience. So I'll explain that too. It's protecting our inherent rights, including property rights, intellectual property, life, creative opportunities, and so forth. And it rewards contribution to society. Now, here's what we've experienced and why the Constitution, I believe, has such genius and why it's worthy of our respect and protection. There's a concept called salutary neglect. Has anybody heard that term before? Kind of a unique or interesting term. This is the idea that, if you look at Jamestown 1607, and then you look at 1620, Pilgrims coming to America, from about 1620 to 1770, 150 years, the colonists experienced self-government. Now they brought baggage with them. I mean, there were, in Britain, slavery was legal. And not only that, but the financial backers of those who colonized certain southern colonies expected slavery to be the way to go. So we bring baggage with us that we have to deal with now as a nation. How do you solve some of these difficult challenges? But the salutary neglect let them be kind of autonomous, have some self-governance for about 150 years. Britain said, oh, there's about 3 million people there. There's some wealth in the colonies now. They're getting maybe too powerful. We better step in and make sure that we're controlling things a little tighter. And that's what stirred things up, to keep it really simple, create the American Revolution. Now, their first attempt at government failed. The Articles of Confederation was the first constitution for the United States. And they were put together to try to get the states organized during the American Revolution. And they were awful. That's why Haym Salomon and Robert Morris and George Washington and others had to figure out unique ways to fund and finance and keep things going. But they learned a lot about that as they continue to study for best approaches. They also wrote 13 constitutions, one for each of the colonies, which were now states. So they had a lot of experience discussing, debating, researching, reading materials, looking at things from the Bible to Cicero from ancient Rome, to try to understand what are the best practices in government. They introduced new concepts of freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of speech into these state constitutions. They had 13 examples and one bad example, 14 then, to look at when they went and created the Constitution during the Constitutional Convention. When it was launched, you have the ratification debates where all 13 colonies debated whether or not to adopt this as the rule of the land. And those ratification debates inform us on the intent of the Constitution, along with things like the Federalist Papers and so forth. And so we have a rich amount of literature and history to look at. But this wasn't just some, hey, we lucked into this, we came up with this Constitution and it worked out so well. Why did it work out so well? And then the first order of business, once the first Congress convened, was to write a Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, to be very clear and specific that these are rights the federal government must honor and protect and defend. And then they put tight controls on that to make sure that the federal government was limited in a number of ways. What were the results? 100 years later, when the United States started as a new nation in we could say around 1776, it was 1/10 of 1% of the population of the world. 1/10 of 1% of the population of the world. 100 years later, it was 5% of the world's population on 5% of the world's landmass, roughly. Well, at that point, it probably wasn't quite 5% yet. And it was generating 50% of the world's wealth and goods and services. Now, that's just one economic way of looking at, was the system, how could that even happen? And it extended that to more people than any nation ever had. Poor immigrants and people of all kinds of backgrounds coming in and experiencing some of those things. So that today, if we look at it, America has the largest economy in the world. It's 2 times bigger than China's, which has 5 times the amount of people. It's 4 times bigger than number 3, which is Japan. And so again, and it also has the largest immigrant population of any nation on earth. More immigrants come to the United States than any other nation. And I was just talking to a friend of mine who was referring to, he served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints back east, and was Chinese speaking. And he talked about these destitute people that he worked with. We went back and visited now about 20 some odd years later, and they are multimillionaire business owners today. Multimillionaires. How do you do that? What is it about this system that enables people to do those kinds of things? Now, do we have problems? Do we have challenges to overcome? Is America's history clean? No, there's a lot of history of oppression and challenge and things that needed to be fixed, but it progressed steadily on a course because of the rule of law, and some amazing things have happened as a result of it. And I believe that system can still help us solve the problems we have today. So the genius of the founding of the United States, number one, it changed the way we looked at sovereignty. It was a divine right of kings before America came in. It became the sovereignty was a concept that says who is the supreme authority in political rule. And with America, it changed that and said, well, we believe that all humans are endowed with certain rights that comes from their creator, and that that they're inherent, not granted by a government. And that changed things dramatically. And it said, okay, so as an individual sovereign, and I want to point out that when they put these words in place in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution, they guaranteed that at some point we would have to reconcile the injustices that were slavery and women not having the right to vote, and we could go on and on. But they put it in place so that because of that language, there was nothing, you had to reconcile that at some point. And so individuals then have this right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And the inherent rights I have to protect those things, I then delegate to governments to help out with. At first family, then local, then state, then federal, not the other way around, so that we have more of a say in the governance of those around us and ourselves. So that was genius. That was a huge change. That was revolutionary. Then the US Constitution was adopted as a supreme law of the land to protect those rights, first and foremost. The Bill of Rights clarified that further, and then the Constitution clearly limited power. We also call it the separation of powers, but it was a clearly defined control on power. And that was an important concept. And those separations was both vertical and horizontal. When I say vertical, things like the 17th Amendment that have changed in the Constitution have eroded the power of the state to check the federal government. And so we have the states were supposed to protect against abuse, and it's still designed to do that. The problem is we've allowed so much precedent to change in the way funding works. And so we found ways around that to continue to push power into one federal government. And Thomas Jefferson said that when all power conglomerates to the federal government, it will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated, King George. And he warned and warned and warned, make sure those separation of powers, both horizontally, which is the three branches of government, most states have followed the same pattern. They're important to protect and maintain. We've eroded some of those things as well. Constitutional loyalty. So question people ask me all the time is, well, there's so much complexity and everything out there. How do I judge what's good, what's bad? How do I keep my eye on these things? What do we do? So I've asked that question, well, how do we simplify this? I want to go back to this concept of social justice versus blind justice, because social justice sounds wonderful. Sounds right, doesn't it? And there are things to fix. Would you agree? There are problems in America that should and need to be addressed. But who gets to decide what social justice looks like? Who gets to decide how to fix that? Who gets to play God, in other words? There's a guy that thought Jews were the problem to the ills of society. And social justice demanded a change there. Or what about, maybe it's the Christians holding on to these archaic traditional beliefs and values that are making us not advance as a society. Or perhaps it's landlords who are charging too much rent price. Or maybe it's greedy business owners, or perhaps males, or Muslims, or Mormons, or moms who have the audacity to believe that they can have a say in the education of their children. Who gets to decide what social justice? Because the second you start trying to fix this thing by forcing that thing, you get injustice. Blind justice is the way to go. There's a reason we have Lady Liberty with the blindfold, or because I was listening to a book today, and it said, talked about the bias in judges in Israel. And they just did a study to see how blood sugar and their tolerance, I can't remember the psychological term now, where they're pardoned about 30% of the cases they were reviewing on average. And they found that almost all of those pardons happened right after they were well rested and had eaten a meal. And when they got close to that next mealtime, there were virtually no pardons happening.
Angry.
What's that?
Hangry.
Hangry, yeah, hangry. It's a real thing. So I want you to go back and think, if a judge who's trying to be impartial and reading through things in Israel is making mistakes based on his hunger level, don't we want as many checks and balances in place to give that person a second chance, a retrial and an appeal process and so forth, instead of letting one oligarch decide, or one person who can be despotic to say, nope, we're going to fix this injustice by oppressing these people, or by taking from this group to give to this group, because that will solve the problem. There will never be real justice when you give one person the power to try to fix injustice. And it means it'll be a little messy at times, but it keeps freedom alive.
Did they at least give those judges snacks?
I think they learned to just give them snacks as time went on. Yeah. I mean, revealing, right? At least break time. They probably needed to have recess and so forth. Send them out to play for a little while. So another scale to judge by is tyranny versus anarchy. Stop getting divided by left versus right and Democrat versus Republican, and it's just all part of this charade that keeps us distracted from the real issue. No, is this going to lead us towards despotism, tyranny, one person, one entity, one group controlling it all? Or is it too weak, going back to the Articles of Confederation, where it can't protect anybody's individual rights anymore? And that's the way we can judge legislation. Is it tyrannical, or is it not? How about, does this protect everyone's basic rights? And let's continue to follow lawful progress as opposed to stirring up all this for problems and trying to force social justice because we're all angry about stuff. Okay, so a couple of things here. Education is important. It matters, and the battle over the education of our kids is probably, in my opinion, one of the most important issues of America today. I put it in the top 3 most important issues, because the battle over weaponized education it's real. It's significant. Why? Because parents keep getting in the way of progress of the state. Parents are getting in the way. It's not an accident that we're seeing the Attorney General calling upon the FBI to create a joint task force because a letter was sent out by the National School Board Association, an association, not a government entity, an association that state school boards are all members of. Those associations have a perpetual life cycle. So if the next person gets elected, will they join that association? That agenda can keep marching on, right? And so they sent this thing saying, hey, there's parents out there that are angry at school boards. We need, under domestic terrorism, a joint task force to protect our school boards. And when they were questioned by Congress, when Attorney General Merrick Garland for his behavior after this, he's like, there was no evidence to support this. None. Yes, there were some people. There's a guy that was pretty upset about his daughter being raped because of a policy of a school board in Virginia, but we don't have time to get into all that. And so keep control local, because when it goes national, you'll have no say anymore in the education of your children. This was just tweeted last month by the Democratic Party of the state of Michigan. They said, not sure where this parents should control what is taught in schools because they are our kids is originating. The purpose of public education is, public education in public schools is not to teach kids only what parents want. It is to teach them what society needs them to know. The client of the public school is not the parent, but the entire community, the public. Now go back to that thinking again of the judges. You really want one bureaucrat in the Department of Education or a few of bureaucrats making every decision on who does it. The Obama administration realized that we don't even have to change curriculum. All we have to do is, in the Department of Education then, all we have to do is change the standardized tests. And then the schools will teach to those tests, and the curriculum in textbooks will change to support the answers in those tests. Not original sources, textbook answers. Department of Education the reason that this can happen is because the power to tax equals the power to control. And the Department of Education can now throw out money out there to try to entice school boards to do things like critical race theory. They attempted it last year, it was defeated. I'll share that as a cool example in a second as we wrap up. Same with COVID right now. If you look at COVID, you can have all your different opinions about that, but one thing is factual. It's really hard to understand who dies from COVID and who dies with COVID. And why is that the case? Because, and this is data I can get directly from my brother-in-law, who is a higher up in IHC. And so it's not hearsay. We see actual factual reasons, like we just don't know. Why? Because the governor, if he keeps a state of emergency on this issue, has access to $400 billion that are floating out there by the federal government for this issue and stimulus money. That's an average of $8 billion per state. So as a state governor, do I have incentive to want to make this a little bit nebulous and make it? Yeah, we can manipulate with money when we let the federal government continue to control. Federal government originally had no power to tax us directly or to manipulate in this fashion. Let's see, encourage the study of original sources. What is the danger of a textbook telling a kid that Thomas Jefferson was a white supremacist, racist slave owner? And that's about all that you get on Thomas Jefferson. What's the danger of that? Because there's truth in that. There's truth in that statement. It's only one side of the story. It's putting him in one big box. And what's the value in that student actually reading the internal struggles of Thomas Jefferson over this issue? What's the value of actually studying and realizing Thomas Jefferson proposed multiple times and pushed legislation to end slavery in Virginia and in the United States? What's the value of actually studying and reading those words that he wrote in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and realize that this is one of the most beautiful human rights charter written that has put things in motion? And I think in the back of his mind, he knew that, hey, we're going to get this thing passed because there's expedience in Great Britain, but these words are going to force us to reconcile these issues. But you have to study and read his biography and dig deep into his actual words, not a phrase in a textbook that says, hey, don't pay attention to any of this stuff. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain, right? What's really going on? And finally, get involved in setting the standards in your community, school boards and so forth. It's important. Because go back to that phrase in the textbook. When a student gets that and can dismiss everything in America's foundation, then these kinds of things become influential. Ava DuVernay, all the problems we're seeing, their foundation lies, all the problems, broad generalization, problem right there with education. Their foundation lies in our racist history as a country. That's never been reconciled, she says. The only solution is to dismantle these systems. We have to get out of the framework, the way of thinking that any of this is salvageable, because it's truly not. It's built on a rotten foundation. Who is Ava DuVernay? Does anybody know? Anybody know?
No.
She's the film director of Disney's movie Wrinkle in Time,
Makes sense.
featuring Oprah Winfrey and others.
The
Yes.
book is great.
Yeah. But if we look at Hollywood, what is the shift in Hollywood right now? Just look at a Marvel movie 10 years ago versus the most recent stuff that's come out. It is not, hey, we have a virtuous character over here. We have this postmodernist worldview that makes you walk away going, what's truth? What's real? What's good? What's bad? And Hollywood's moving us in that direction all the time. So how do you help kids reconcile this when they get a little textbook thing that says, don't pay attention to any of that founding fathers stuff? That's the white patriarchy. Well, how about just go read their writings to see if there's any merit to them? Judging by what's inside. I love this quote by C.S. Lewis from In the Last Battle. And then she understood the devilish cunning of the enemy's plan. By mixing a little truth with it, they had made their lie stronger. There's a little bit of truth in all of these things. But when we keep people from seeing the whole picture, not trying to put it, as you said, in one box, right? We get a richer, fuller, clearer picture of what's real, what's not, and what really protects our freedom. Way back in our founding, Samuel Adams warned us. He said, the utopian schemes of leveling or redistribution of wealth and a community of goods. Definition of that: government ownership and control of production and distribution are as visionary and impractical as those which vest all property in the crown. These ideas are arbitrary, despotic, and in our government, unconstitutional. And that's where I want us to start wrapping things up today. That is one of the critical ways to judge whether or not something is right or wrong in terms of political decisions in our government. Is it constitutional? There was brilliant checks and balances put in place to protect against the tyranny of governments. So in all of my years of talking to people face to face, I've collected the responses people give me for not getting involved. And I summed them up, they pretty much all fall under one of these categories. And most of them are all a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's the irony. I'll sit there with somebody and say, hey, let's take action on this. I can't make a difference. I don't know what's going on. I'm not smart enough. This isn't my ball wax. I hate politics. It all makes me mad. It all makes me angry. I don't have time. I'm afraid of being canceled, most recently starting to happen. And when we believe any of these things, it leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't take action. I won't take action. I can't be part of the solution. And so let's look at the evidence that you can make a difference. How many of you know who William Wilberforce is? Some have heard of him. William Wilberforce was a member of British Parliament, late 1800s. For 20 years, he battled in Parliament trying to take down the slave trade in the British Empire. 20 years. And a small group of people that rallied behind him. At times, I mean, think about this. Think about how frustrating this is. And so when you look at politics and you get frustrated, I want you to think of William Wilberforce. Because a lot of times we use him as an example. Say, well, I'm not eloquent. I can't speak like that guy. I don't have a seat in Parliament. I don't have money. Whatever, right? But he almost had it beat. He almost had the vote. He had all the votes necessary to kill the slave trade in Great Britain. And people, those key swing voters, were bribed away by lobbyists with opera tickets. They went to the opera instead of showing up for the vote that day. And another 10 years of slaves being packed in the bottom of ships because men like that have no backbone and courage. Does that exist in our society today? Yes. But can we turn a blind eye to it? No. Because when you do get involved, things like this happen. And these are stories I've personally been a part of. So the Environmental Protection Agency a while back said, we don't need Congress's approval. We're going to see if we can push the envelope to the extreme. Remember, the EPA, it's Congress that is to write laws, not the executive branch that the EPA falls under. This is an erosion of our checks and balances, horizontal checks and balances. EPA says, we're going to see if we can't just become Congress, basically. They said that they could fine a business or a property owner and go right into their bank account and begin garnishing their wages to satisfy that fine. Judge, jury, prosecutor, no day in court. What if you have some rogue agent out there that's angry and upset and just hates you as a business owner? This happens. It's been found to happen, and goes in there, finds you, and you don't have your recourse. I mean, dangerous on so many levels. One, just letting the EPA get away with saying we can legislate like that. We caught wind of this when I worked with a legislative research firm. That firm is responsible for the largest source of direct constituent opinion that goes to Washington. And so we put out an alert nationwide. This was published in the Federal Register. It has to stand for 30 days. Now, how many of you know what the Federal Register is? Who's ever read the Federal Register? Right? Boring. You won't read it, I promise. I've never even really read the Federal Register, but I will use a service that alerts me when there's something in there. Okay, I can see a little blurb there. Oh, that's bad. Click a link, type in a little concern, hit send, and that's what happened here. Once we put the alert out, people clicked the link, responded, took them a few minutes. We're not asking for a commitment of Haim Solomon here, a few minutes, right? And the EPA, 24 hours later, issued a statement. Due to the receipt of adverse comments, the EPA is withdrawing their direct final rule for administrative wage garnishment. Public details it. 24 hours. How many people do you think it took? How many letters do you think it took getting officially being submitted through the Federal Register? How many do you think it took nationwide to get the EPA to stop? Anyone want to guess? 10,000?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna guess.
10,000? Higher or lower? Who's going higher? Who's going lower? Lower? Anyone else? Somebody online said lower. It's a lot lower. It was just under 900. Just under 900. Now, here's a little trick here. Last year, middle of the year, Department of Education publishes their intent in the Federal Register to push critical race theory into the school districts of America. Critical race theory and systemic racism. And they offer priority funding and grants to school districts that will put it in. Now, are you enticed if you're in a school district a little poorer to go grab that money? Absolutely, right? Well, we caught wind of this again. We put out a regulatory alert, goes nationwide. We actually been talking to some, we started a Commonwealth school and we're like sending out to people and being like, okay, let's people write in on this. And I watched, there was a couple thousand. I'm like, well, it's not like the EPA issue. Department of Education is not moving, and there's a couple thousand. It's even more, crickets still from the Department of Education. We put out I asked the legislative research firm that I've worked with for years, will you put this out there? If your members nationwide, they mostly work with small business owners. So yeah, we will. And we'll put it out. 30,000 more complaints came in after that. And the Department of Education issued a statement that said, due to the receipt of adverse comments, we're withdrawing the curriculum for critical race theory and systemic racism, no longer offering priority funding or grants. Is that important? Is that a big win? Does the media go around saying, hey, victory for we the people? No, the narrative is obviously very different in the media. So now people ask me, well, how do I know if something's good or bad in legislation? It's too complicated for me. Well, one thing we've committed to do at our FreedomSHIFT organization is to help people start to recognize freedom versus force in legislation, and also to recognize, is it constitutional or not? And if we can learn to do those two things, we can protect our freedoms. And here's what we realized that we needed to do as an organization. Number one, simplify the process. And all the thousands of people I've talked to, people just won't write a letter to their congressman. And I won't make you raise your hands, but inside, how many of you have sat down and written a letter to your congressman? Before I started working, thank you.
An email?
One time.
An email?
Or an email.
Yes.
Email count. Well, you are a special group. Most people will never do it in their lifetime. The vast majority of Americans will never do it. Yet they'll look me square in the eye in those 10,000 conversations and say, are you naive? Are you stupid? You think me writing a letter to my congressman is going to do any good? They don't care what I think. I've talked to state legislators that are like, we got 10 letters last week on this issue. I don't know what's going on. They're all looking over their shoulder, right? 10 letters gets them like moving, because we've learned through research that some congressional offices assume that if they get a real letter, a real communication from somebody in their district, they're taking an assumption that 800 other people in their community in that district must feel the same way as them. That's a significant weighted response. You can represent your community by communicating with them. But still, even though I tell people that, I promise you, you're going to be busy. You've got a family to run. You've got a house. You got jobs. Are you going to, like tomorrow? I was like, nah, it's just kind of ticking me out. I don't look at my comments and write them a letter. How many of us will do that? I don't even do that.
Full letters to mine.
Yeah, I don't do that. But you know what I do? I rely on some tools that prompt me. I mean, I guess I do it because it's kind of my job now. It's part of my job. I do a lot of things. But so we knew we got to simplify it, make it super easy for somebody to see and get informed, and then make it really easy to take effective action, and then leverage technology and the strength of numbers. Could we get 800 people to write in on an issue and turn something around? We could. What if we got, my vision, my dream is 1 million freedom shifters nationwide. Very freedom shifters. But you know what? I'll take 10,000, because 10,000 will do incredible things. And so what we're committed to doing is putting those tools and technology in front of everyday people who are concerned, not a business owner who can afford to pay for service or et cetera, but anybody who will agree to, basically, I agree to protect our Constitution by communicating with my elected officials. That's our agreement with people. If you agree to do that, then let's make some tools and technology, some really cool, powerful tools and technology that we know works on things like the issues I just shared with you, and I could share many others, and bring that right to your forefront. So what we do at FreedomSHIFT is we put out what we call our Freedom Shifter report. It offers a freedom alert once a month, so you're not inundated or overwhelmed. And if you only wrote in on 3 of those in the course of a year, you'd be doing more than almost anybody in their entire lifetime will ever do. that Freedom Alert will make you aware of something like what happened with the school boards. When parents disagree with school district curriculum, should they have the right to spirited nonviolent protests without suppression by the government? I don't know, maybe that's a loaded question there, but that's exactly what was happening. And that's exactly what's still a threat right now. If people don't get involved, well, then this technology is what we call a right now feature. You just, so it just shows the president, the attorney general, the secretary of education, but then it also has the 2 senators, your representative, governor, and state legislators. And so with one click, after you type in there, yes, I believe parents do that, this right needs to be protected. And the Department of Education shouldn't be getting involved to try to suppress that right or whatever. And you don't have to be eloquent. You don't have to write in complete sentences. In fact, the congressional offices say, we like it really short. It's better if it's short. Don't write me a book and rip me to pieces in here and tell me how big of an idiot and bully I am. Just tell me what you need me to do. And then I literally have a stack of letters that high from congressional offices talking about how letters, phone calls, few people getting involved that dramatically changed legislation, gotten them aware of things they would have never known about before, how it impacts them. And yet nobody, the media doesn't tell us this, we don't believe it. So anyway, you put that in there, information goes in with one click, it goes to all those people. And it looks as if it's coming right out of your email inbox so that they can verify it as a real constituent, not coming from a third-party lobby group.
Will this only address federal?
State issues as well. Yeah. As we are able to grow and expand more, we hope that people can watch every state. Right now, it's kind of me. So, but if somebody brings something to our attention, we'll definitely create it. In fact, we're trying to partner with other organizations that are doing things where they send me, hey, this is a serious issue, and we can put out one of our alerts and let them use. We have invested quite a bit in this technology here to get that out, and so if we can help other groups as well. Anyway, then there's a freedom fundamental. It's a story-based thing, kind of like the Haim Solomon story that teaches you a fundamental of free societies. Freedom Amp Up is more of like the EPA story, which says, hey, keep your head up, have some hope. We're making a difference. Here's an example. We just beat the Department of Education, so people are like, oh, it does work. It's not all doom and gloom. It's not like we're just, we have to sit on the sidelines and just take what's coming. And then we put a podcast down. We have some really great guests that we've had on there that are phenomenal. So something simple each week, takes literally a matter of minutes, and it's for the opportunity to protect our freedoms. Here's the agreement. If you agree to be part of this movement to protect our Constitution and inherent rights by leveraging quick and easy tools and technology directly influenced by representative governments, then it's free to you. Then it's a free service to you. So in wrapping up here, I know that the challenge is, if I send you away right now and say, go home, go to our website, sign up for the alerts and updates, we don't often do it. Or go write to Congressman right now. So I'm going to challenge you to at least get the process started with you. Okay. So if you would, pull out your smartphones, go to freedomshift.com, and then see where it says try, right? These things never show up on screens. It says try it, click that try button. So you don't even have to go through the process of registering, which you can do right there, become a member of Freedom Shifter. Okay, so if you click on that try button, that should come up to this page. Does everybody see this page on there? So here's 4 sample freedom alerts, if you will, ballots, things that you can write in on. Would anybody be willing to be courageous and be my, just kind of walk you through this process? We won't make you actually write it right now in front of everybody, but would anybody be willing to kind of walk you through this?
Yeah.
Who said yeah?
Yeah, me.
Okay,
Sure.
tell me your name.
Sarah.
Sarah. Okay, so Sarah, protecting our elections is for the People Act, really, and this is trying to federalize the election process. Then the federal attempt to silence parents who protest against their school districts or the curriculum. Does critical race theory have a place in our schools, and should COVID-19 vaccine mandates be happening? Which one of those?
I have a feeling on all of those. Let's go with the mandate.
The mandate. Okay, so go ahead and click on that,
Okay.
and everybody click on your issue. And remember, hot button issues. If we just
I
get
feel like
mad,
I'm Price is Right. This is fun.
Yeah.
so if you just get mad at issues and post something on Facebook, well, we can get canceled and whatever else, right? If I just go into a school board meeting and yell because I'm mad, well, somebody might show up and arrest you. Okay, but if I go directly and influence the system, Well, the Supreme Court ruled that these were unconstitutional vaccine mandates, at least coming through OSHA.
Right.
And the legislator may try to do it still. So it's still relevant. We still need to let them know, hey, wait a minute, how we feel. But if we can go influence the system the way it was intended to be, we can protect our system. And this is how you're doing it. Okay, so you clicked on that now.
I clicked on it. I got
Okay.
down to the message body.
Okay, so yeah, you can read. So what we put in there is usually we'll put a little summary statement, we'll put a for and against statement, and then we'll put a constitutional perspective in there. So you can read all that. Or you probably like, I don't need any of that. I already know how I feel about that. So you just click the right now thing.
My thoughts about COVID mandate.
Yeah, so if you want to say it in front of everybody, feel free to.
I don't like it.
Okay,
Yes,
so
that.
so you're vaccinated, but you don't like it.
Yep.
Okay, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
So, so you're, and why don't you like it?
Because, well, I don't like it coming from the federal government.
Okay.
I mean, they're not mandating any other sort of, like my kids can get an exemption for any sort of vaccine to go to school. And yet you're gonna mandate an adult, like it just doesn't make sense. If you wanna get a vaccine because you're nervous about COVID, go get a vaccine.
Right.
If they're so effective, go protect yourself.
So what you're saying is it
And I
needs,
have kids who are too young to get vaccinated, and I still feel this way.
yeah. So what you're saying is the federal government doesn't have
And
a
if you were
business.
going to mandate, let me just get rid of it. If you're gonna mandate that you don't have a right to choose, then you also should not have a right to abortion. So those two go hand in hand
Okay,
together.
so let's stop the hypocrisy then. Is that fair to
Thank
say?
you.
Okay, so you
Yes.
just put 3 sentences together
Okay.
and even
What
more
did
if
I
you
just
wanted
say?
to.
Okay, I'll do it.
But, okay, so now what you just said is, the federal government has no business forcing a vaccine or mandating or forcing a vaccine on me. What happened to my body, my choice? If you want to use the actual language for abortion, right? You could throw that in there. It can't be both. This needs to be left up to the decision of the individual. And then that's it. And then you can hit send. And it'll go to the right people, at the right time. And by the way, if you click the opt-in buttons, then that's saying to us, go ahead and start sending me the FreedomSHIFT report. You don't have to actually go onto the part and become a member. It'll put you in there. So there's 2 ways you can do it. Now, how long did that take? I know it's still happening. I know it's still happening.
fast.
And if it was on a computer, how long would it take?
Yeah, not very long.
Right? Could you do that in less than 5 minutes?
Yeah.
Is freedom worth 5 minutes in a week? I could put my social media aside for a little bit, right? I mean, come on, how many of us have gone to check one thing on our phone, and the next thing we know, we're 45 minutes later and we've been watching cat videos for the last 15 minutes. Like we've all experienced something like that, right? Like, what is this that I'm watching? This is ridiculous, right? And I could have taken 5 minutes to actually protect freedom. We could trade off just a little tiny bit. Think of Haim Solomon and these others who committed their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor to establishing a free society that has literally protected millions and millions of people from a fate that maybe Haim Solomon's relatives had to suffer in Poland, Germany, and so forth. It's worth it. It's worth it. One last thing, how can I help? People ask me that question. How can we help? Use the service. Number 1, please use it. Please use it. Number 2, share it with others. Find a way to encourage them. Hey, dude, check out this right now thing. Get on it. It's worth it. I'd be happy to go talk to another group or jump on a Zoom meeting, or one of my partners would do that. The only funding that we receive is through what we call Patriot Pay It Forward members. They're the ones that make it available to other people. We've done that on purpose. In fact, here's our guiding principles if somebody is interested. The bottom one there you see, we believe in self-funding through the people who use and make this service available to others. We don't take government funding, large donations from entities seeking to push their agenda through FreedomSHIFT. So we're trying to keep it free. So it's available to anybody, but that's the only funding that we receive. And so some people ask, well, can we help support you? Yes, there's options. So becoming a Patriot Pay It Forward member basically says, I'll pay for myself and one other. I'll pay for myself and 10 others. And yeah, and so people could select that and pay.
I'm not even seeing that on your.
You go to the website and then click down.
this one?
Yeah, so see right here, it says if your grade's free, right there, pay for it. Yeah, click that button, it takes you there. And then the final thing, be vigilant and be hopeful. Remember, the coach in high school sports, when the team gets that look in their eye, like, we can't beat these guys, they lose. But I've seen we got small guys on my team. My starting point guard is 5'4". And we go against a lot of big schools, big teams, and we've beaten some really tough opponents because they keep this belief in their mind. We'll only act when we believe we can make a difference. And I hope that what we've shared tonight shows that your involvement matters, that tools and technology can make a difference, that if we operate within the system, influence the right people at the right time and the strength of numbers, then we can preserve our freedoms for the next generation and our children, our grandchildren. It's the way it's always been done. It's because of Haim Solomons of the world and many others through history that do stand up to the tyranny and keep fighting and make it right for us and the next generation. So be hopeful, be vigilant, use the tool. If I can answer any questions, I'm happy to. Thank you all for your attention and participation. Jenny, thanks for opening up your home and having us in here, and it's been a pleasure. So again, make sure you all write on
So
there.
there were a few questions online.
Yes.
One of the questions, and I think you kind of addressed it already, but let's go maybe a little bit more into detail. Maybe get over to this. Was, do you think emails are less powerful than custom written letter?
I mean, writing a handwritten letter and sticking it in a traditional mailbox.
I think so. And
Is that the question?
if somebody, Chase, if you want to unmute yourself and tell us what you had in mind there. Don't know.
Yeah, sorry. I was thinking like an actual physical letter arriving on someone's desk versus maybe even the nuance of like, if I were a person and I got a whole bunch of letters that seemed to have been written by somebody that had sent it out to a big list and then they just pushed a button, and all those emails are the same too. I kind of wonder what has the most clout.
That's a great question. So let's take the NRA, for example, one of the biggest lobbies in America. If they send out to their members a card that they can forward in, or an email that they can forward in, and it has the language of the NRA's agenda issue, it becomes a tally mark for the congressman. Round file, trash. And at the end of the day, they already know how many members the NRA has, and they already know the agenda of the NRA. So it's not very effective. I mean, support the groups you want to support, but it's not as effective if I'm just forwarding in the language that they sent to me. And so that's one thing. So that's why we use our right now feature. We don't pre-populate it with talking points, because we actually want you to formulate your own phrase. And again, it doesn't have to be a complete sentence. It just needs to get the idea across. You can voice to text it, and just talk something in there, send it off. To answer your question about a hard copy letter, because of anthrax and other scares, it takes a really long time to get on that congressman's desk. Goes through irradiation back in Washington, D.C. I'm sure not all offices are that way, certainly not at the state level. But we do both. We've done both with other groups I've been involved in. And you just can't always get the issue out, printed, sent, get people alerted, writing the letter and sending it back in time. So as long as it is in your own language, that's the first thing that's important. Make sure that it's in your words. And then the second thing is, if they can verify it's an original IP address and it's not some mass emailing, which they should be able to. I don't know if IP address is the right word, but however they can verify that it's an individual's email not being spammed, then they'll catch it. And this technology, or they'll look at that as an individual letter, just like, and they're preferring emails over the physical form of mail anyway. Our tool on there does do that. It makes it look, and I've gotten phenomenal, makes it look like it's coming from you, original source. And I've gotten phenomenal responses back from the president's office, the senators, and so forth. And they're coming back fairly quickly. Usually what happens is they'll send a form letter back initially saying, hey, thank you, we received it. And then sometimes you'll get a more detailed response. I always recommend that people put some kind of statement at the end of your letter that says, I should have done that with you. As a constituent or as somebody in your district, I would like to know your thoughts on this issue. I need to know your position. And that usually tells them, I better communicate back with this person. So does that answer your question? Hopefully that answers the question.
I think it does. And one other thing I kind of get into the trap of is spending about 6 hours writing some really detailed letter when it might just get chalked up for a tally mark. So I'm getting from what you're saying that short and sweet does the trick, just be to the point, and pretty much you're just going to get counted for or against something anyway. So why go into the details?
Yeah, for the most part.
Does it
For the
have to
most
go into
part,
the details to make sure that they know that you're a real person? I don't know.
yeah, that's the main thing. Know you're a real person. Make it really clear what your position is. It's a weighted response for them, but often it's a staffer that's going to be interpreting that and then picking the right response to send back to you.
And I would add the third thing that you're saying there is tell them that you're holding them accountable as a constituent.
Yes. Yeah, I expect no. And if you're really upset and they give you some generic form letter and you're like, this is not acceptable. Like I've had people, print it out, write a handwritten note on it, and then scan it and send it back to them, or fax it to their office. You can still send fax messages to them, and that works too. And say, this is not acceptable. I need to know a real position on this. And they've gotten phone calls from that congressional office to talk to them directly. So yeah, you can take it to another level.
Will you also address, you talked about here in Utah, you have issues that are going on here in the state, and that can be addressed here in Utah, but you're looking to expand that to other states and are looking for resources and you have some resources.
Yeah, we pretty much bootstrapped everything at this point, so we need resources.
Okay.
We definitely need resources to be able to grow and expand that way. But an example, a lot of people feel like that we should amend the original Constitution to have term limits. And there's reasons for and against the term limit. But the states have the ability to amend the Constitution. And you don't have to do it through a convention. You just get the legislative bodies of the states, 3/4 of them, to pass the amendment, and it's now law. Override the federal government. That's a check that still exists. It's really close to the number right now of states that have said, let's go ahead and create a term limits for members of Congress. It's a long discussion for me to tell you what I really believe about term limits. But the point is, yeah, if we can, imagine freedom shifters in every state across the country, and we go ahead and come up with the legislation and we get it introduced in a state and the state legislature passed it, and then it starts spreading out there and you get freedom shifters all over the country saying, pass this, pass this, pass this, pass this. Well, you could get them into the Constitution. Without a convention, you could even repeal perhaps something like the 17th.
Do you think
It'd be
if
super
we
hard
had
to
a
do that.
constitutional
Or not the
convention
16th.
right now,
What's
that
that?
would be detrimental or helpful?
Say that again.
If we had because I know they talked about it probably a couple of years ago, the thought of having a constitutional convention. Do you think that would be more detrimental the way that politics is now, or do you think it could be helpful?
I think that there are too many in the system now that have power to ensure that those who believe in the kinds of things we've been talking about tonight would manipulate that convention. I think it would become dangerous. Yeah.
Any other questions? Anybody online have questions?
I'm curious what if there was like a specific event like those 18 years ago that made you kind of look at the government and kind of say, what are we doing? Because I think I felt like that the past couple years, but there's been a lot more chaos. And so I'm kind of curious, like if there was a singular event when you decided to kind of get into this stuff.
For me,
Yeah.
yeah, it was when a school teacher decided that they were going to impose their morals on 6th grade kids. And I went, well, why would my federal tax dollars be going into this, for this person to be able to impose their moral agenda on 6th graders when they're not even capable of really understanding what she's pushing? And I was just baffled by that. I couldn't understand how we got to the point in society where we're holding this up as a human interest story instead of hey, forget the morality of the issue itself. Let's just look at the morality of her trying to indoctrinate 6th graders. And that's what got me stirred up.
There was one other question.
Yeah.
He said, how do you determine which issues to address with what you're?
We're looking at, so if you go to our guiding principles here, that'll give you an idea of it. Is this potentially violating the human rights granted by our Creator that government is supposed to oversee and protect? Does this threaten to erode our Constitution further, or the principles in the Declaration of Independence? In other words, is it empowering government to become unilateral? We're looking at that. Those are a couple of big things. Our filters are tyranny versus force and constitutional loyalty. And I believe that we can get a large group of people who will disagree on certain issues, and that's okay. We're not supposed to be of one mind. You don't come up with great solutions to real problems by having groupthink, right? I teach corporations as well. We need innovation and ideas and so forth. And there should be a push and pull between conservatism and liberalism, if you will. And those ideas of, hey, can the government still operate within these boundaries, but still solve some real problems? So yes, there's a reason government exists and it has a purpose. But if we ever empower the government to force one thing, we give them the power to force other things. And when we give one bureaucrat who's not elected and have accountability the power to control, say, curriculum, then we lose the ability to influence, and it gives them the ability to manipulate and push their agendas and ideologies that may be very, in our opinion, detrimental to the foundation of a free society. So we try to simplify it. We believe that there's a lot of people out there who can get this idea. Well, wait a minute. If a judge can make a mistake because he's hangry, then the head of the Department of Education can certainly make a mistake, especially when he's being manipulated behind the scenes by really powerful people and organizations and money and so forth. And we know that happens all the time. I mean, local school or city councils. How many stories could you go out there and find of the local contractor or the local developer being able to figure out how to manipulate the city council for his project so he can make millions? And if it's happening there, do you think that the biggest government in the world where the most money and power exists, that there's some enticement to try to manipulate things for gain and so forth? Yeah, so be wary of granting too much power there. So that's really a big filter. Is it constitutional? And then the freedom versus force filter.
All right. Anything else? I just want to add one last thought, and it's something that I learned from the Constitution class that Karen Layton's been hosting. It was by Benjamin Rush, and it said, if you don't keep control of the government, it will become the great enemy of your family. And that really stuck with me. I have a lot of friends and family who are like, I don't care. It's not a big deal to me. I have friends that are liberal, friends that are conservative, and I like to stay in the middle. That's neither here nor there. We've been given freedom here, and we have to protect that. And that has nothing to do with your ideologies one way or the other. It has to do with, are we going to protect our basic human rights that we've been provided in the Constitution? And are we going to protect our families and our communities in order to do that? And I'm really passionate about this. I really hope all of you that are here tonight on Zoom and here in our home will take the opportunity to just tell 10 people about it. I contacted about 120 people. Okay. How many people did I get here? I got 15, 5 online, 10 in person. Okay. That's the percentages. When you throw a party, right? When you throw a party, you're going to get maybe 25 to 50% of the people coming. That's when you're doing something fun. Right? So I expected, and we talked about this when I was texting Richard, he says, just keep in mind about 20% of the people, that's all it takes to get involved. And that's pretty much what we got, right? Like about 20% of the 100 people that I asked. And I had several that were out of town this weekend. Anyway, long story short.
And Jenny, these shifts happen, freedom shifts happen with 1.5 to 2.5% of the population.
Okay.
One way or the other.
So, yeah, it's that's great. So just do your best to share it with whoever you can get to listen. And that's my whole goal in doing this tonight. So thank you again. Appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Super excited for this.
Now, before we get hangry, Looks like.
Yeah, there's freshmen. Sorry, people on Zoom.
Can't join us.